This concept is copyrighted 2024 by Novus Renaissance, the home of the supernatural fantasy series Vahdor and its lost legends and sagas of pre-flood Earth. This is the third video of the Voronda Orthodox Tolkien timeline of the Second Age of Middle-earth, and is part of Novus Renaissance's Heretics and Hounds series that counters the blatant abysmal postmodern heresy of the Rings of Power show, with events from Professor Tolkien's The Fall of Numenor, published in 2022, edited by Christopher JRR Tolkien and Mr. Brian Sibley. Also, JRR Tolkien's The Nature of Middle-earth, published in 2021, edited by Carl F. Hostetter. The third period summary of the Second Age is one of utter desecration by the hand of Sauron of the Eldar's realms of Eregion and the dwarf realm of Moria. In fact, until the entry of Numenor into the conflict, Morgoth's chief lieutenant was superior to the Eldar and dwarfs in all the arts of strategy and war during this chronology. If you have yet to review our two previous videos concerning the first and second periods of the Second Age, covering years 1 through 1199, we encourage thee to do so. A note from Mr. Brian Sibley concerning the 1731 date of kingship for Tar Minister, the 9th King of Numenor, is the following: that although the date of Second Age 1700 given for this intervention by Tar Minister is clearly established in the Legendarium, it is at variance with the dates given for the reign of his aunt, Queen Tar Telperien, Silver Daughter, the second ruling queen and 8th ruler of Numenor, from 1556 to 1731. Christopher Tolkien wrote in Unfinished Tales that he could not in any way account for this discrepancy. For the sequence of this timeline, Tar Minister's ascension to the throne will be placed from 1690 to 1695 Second Age. Now, the continuation of the Voronda Orthodox Tolkien timeline of the Second Age of Middle-earth. The third period of the Second Age, Rings Wars, and the annihilation of Eregion, 1200 through 1799. Year 1200, Sauron endeavors to seduce the Eldar. Gil Galad refuses to treat with him, but the smiths of Eregion are won. The Numenorians begin to make permanent havens. Sauron, who had come out of hiding in year 600, had revealed himself in fair form, began to seek power by force, marshalling again and directing the orcs and other evil things of the First Age, and secretly building his great fortress in the south that was afterward known as Mordor. Long he sought to persuade the Elves to his service, for he knew that the firstborn had the greater power, and he went far and wide among them, and his hue was still that of both fair and wise. Only to Lindon he did not come, for Gil Galad and Elrond doubted him and his fair seeming, and though they knew not who in truth he was, they would not admit him to that land. The power of Galadriel and Celeborn had grown. Galadriel, striving to counteract the machinations of Sauron, was successful in Lothlorien, while in Lindon Gil Galad had shut out Sauron's emissaries, and even Sauron himself. But Sauron had better fortune with the Noldor of Eregion, and especially with Celebrimbor, who desired in his heart to rival the skill and fame of Fëanor. In Eregion, Sauron posed as an emissary of the Valar, sent by them to Middle-earth, or ordered by them to remain there to give aid to the Elves. He perceived at once that Galadriel would be his chief adversary and obstacle, and he endeavored, therefore, to placate her, bearing her scorn with outward patience and courtesy. The Elves of Eregion received Sauron gladly, and few among them hearkened to the messengers from Lindon, bidding them beware, for Sauron took to himself the name Annatar, the Lord of Gifts, and they had at first much profit from his friendship. And he said to them, speaking of his rejection by the Elves of Lindon, to quote, "Alas, for the weakness of the great, for a mighty king is Gil Galad, and wise in all lore is Master Elrond, and yet they will not aid me in my labours. Can it be that they do not desire to see other lands become as blissful as their own? But wherefore should Middle-earth remain forever desolate and dark, whereas the Elves could make it as Eresia, nay, even as Valinor? And since you have not returned thither, as you might, I perceive that you love this Middle-earth, as do I. Is it not then our task to labour together for its enrichment, and for the raising of all the Elven kindreds, that wander here untaught to the height of that power and knowledge which those have who are beyond the sea?" End quote. It was in Eregion that the counsels of Sauron were most gladly received, for in that land the Noldor desired ever to increase the skill and subtlety of their works. They were not at peace in their hearts, since they had refused to return to the west, and they desired both to stay in Middle-earth. Therefore they hearkened to Sauron, and learned of him many things, for his knowledge was great. In those days, the smiths of Ostined Hill surpassed all that they had contrived before, but Sauron guided their labours, and he was aware of all that they did, for his desire was to set a bond upon the Elves, and to bring them under his vigilance. Sauron used all his arts upon Celebrimbor and his fellow smiths, who had formed a society or brotherhood, very powerful in Eregion, the Gwaith Mirdain, but he worked in secret, unknown to Galadriel and Celeborn. Before long, Sauron had the Gwaith Mirdain under his influence. Year 1280. Taranarian becomes the 8th King of Numenor. Year 1350 to 1400. So great became Sauron's hold on the Gwaith Mirdain that at length he persuaded them to revolt against Galadriel and Celeborn, and to seize power in Eregion. Galadriel thereupon left Eregion and passed through Khazad-dûm to Lothlorien, taking with her Amroth and Celebrimbor. But Celeborn would not enter the mansions of the Dwarves, and he remained behind in Eregion, disregarded by Celebrimbor in Lothlorien. Galadriel took up rule and defence against Sauron. Year 1394. Tar-Surion, son of Tar, Anarion becomes the 9th King of Numenor. Year 1500. The Elven smiths, instructed by Sauron, reach the height of their skill. They begin the forging of the Rings of Power. Sauron himself departed from Eregion about the year 1500, after the Gwaith Mirdain had begun the making of the Rings of Power. Year 1556. Tar-Telperion becomes the 2nd ruling queen of Numenor. She was long-lived, for the women of the Numenorians had the longer life, or laid down their lives less easily, and she would wed with no man. Year 1590. The 3 rings are completed in Eregion. Now these were the 3 that had last been made, and they possessed the greatest power. Narya, the red ring, the ring of fire, set with ruby. Nenya, the white ring, the ring of water, set with adamant or diamond. Vilya, the blue ring, the ring of air, set with sapphire. Year 1600. Sauron forges the one ring in Orodruin. Now the elves had made many rings, but secretly Sauron made one ring to rule all the others, and their power was bound up with it, to be subject wholly to it, and to last only so long as it too should last. And much of that strength and will of Sauron passed into that one ring. For the power of the elven rings was very great, and that which should govern them must be a thing of surpassing potency. And Sauron forged it in the mountain of fire in the land of shadow, and while he wore the one ring, he could perceive all things that were done by means of lesser rings, and he could see and govern the very thoughts of those that wore them. As soon as Sauron set the one ring upon his finger, the elves were aware of him, and they knew him, and perceived he would be master of them, and of all they wrought. Then in anger and fear they took off their rings. Now Celebrimbor was not corrupted in heart or faith, but had accepted Sauron as what he posed to be, and when he at length discovered the existence of the One Ring, he revolted against Sauron, and went to Lothlorien to take counsel once more with Galadriel. They should have destroyed all the Rings of Power at this time, but they failed to find the strength. Galadriel counselled him that the 3 rings of the elves should be hidden, never used, and dispersed, far from Eregion, where Sauron believed them to be. It was at that time she received Nenya, the white ring, from Celebrimbor, and by its power the realm of Lothlorien was strengthened and made beautiful. Celebrimbor followed Galadriel's counsel that the ring of air and the ring of fire should be sent out of Eregion, and he entrusted them to Gil Galad in Lindon. As soon as Gil Galad began to fear that Sauron would come with open war into Eriador, he sent messages to Numenor, and on the shores of Lindon the Numenorians began to build up a force and supplies for war. Although only revealed when subject to fire, the One Ring bore an inscription. The letters were of Elvish, of an ancient mode, but the language was that of Mordor, which rendered in the common tongue read,
"One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, in the darkness bind them. 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie."
Year 1600 to 1690. As soon as Sauron's disguise was pierced, and he was recognized as an enemy, he exerted all his time and strength to gathering and training armies. It took some 90 years before he felt ready to open war. Year 1690 to 1695, the earliest estimate of the rule of Tar-Ministir, 9th King of Numenor. This name he had because he built a high tower upon the hill of Oro-Met, nigh to Anduni-A, and the western shores, and thence would spend great parts of his days gazing westward, for the yearning was growing strong in the hearts of the Numenorians. He loved the Eldar, but envied them. Year 1693, War of the Elves and Sauron begins. The three rings are hidden. Sauron, finding that he was betrayed, and that the elves were not deceived, was filled with wrath, and he came against them with open war, demanding that all the rings should be delivered to him, since the elven smiths could not have attained their making without his law and counsel. But the elves fled from him, and 3 of their rings they saved, and bore them away, and hid them. Sauron could not discover the 3, for they were given into the hands of the wise, who concealed them, and never again used them openly, while Sauron kept the ruling ring. Therefore the 3 remained unsullied, for they were forged by Celebrimbor alone, and the hand of Sauron had never touched them, yet they were also subject to the One. From that time war never ceased between Sauron and the elves. Year 1695, Sauron's forces invade Eriador. Gil Galad sends Elrond to Eregion. When Sauron learned of the repentance and revolt of Celebrimbor, his disguise fell, and his wrath was revealed, and gathering a great force, he moved over Caelan Arthun, that is Rohan, to the invasion of Eriador. When news of this reached Gil Galad, he sent out a force under Elrond half-elven, but Elrond had far to go, and Sauron turned north and made at once for Eregion, and besieged it. Gil Galad called on Numenor for aid. Then Tar-Ministir the king sent out a great navy, but it was delayed. Celeborn and Amroth with Nandor and Dwarves come through Moria to the west. When Celebrimbor heard of the onset of Sauron, fearing to keep the 3 rings himself, he sent one to Galadriel in Lothlorien by Amroth. The scouts and vanguard of Sauron's host were already approaching, when Celeborn made a sortie, and drove them back. But though he was able to break out and join his force to that of Elrond, they could not return to Eregion, for Sauron's host was far greater than theirs, great enough both to hold them off, and closely to besiege Eregion. Year 1697, Eregion laid waste. Death of Celebrimbor, the gates of Moria are shut. Elrond retreats with remnant of the Noldor, and founds the refuge of Imladris. At last the attacker broke into Eregion with ruin and devastation, and captured the chief object of Sauron's assault, the house of the Mirdain, where were their smithies and their treasures. Celebrimbor, desperate, himself withstood Sauron on the steps of the great door of the Mirdain, but he was grappled and taken captive, and the house was ransacked. There Sauron took the 9 rings and other lesser works of the Mirdain, but the 7 and the 3 he could not find. Celebrimbor was put to torment, and Sauron learned from him where the 7 were bestowed. Concerning the 3 rings, Sauron could learn nothing from Celebrimbor, and he had him put to death. But he guessed the truth that the 3 had been committed to Elvish guardians, and that must mean to Galadriel and Gil Galad. In black anger he turned back to battle, and bearing as a banner Celebrimbor's body hung upon a pole, shot through with orc arrows, he turned upon the forces of Elrond. Elrond gathered such few of the elves of Eregion that had escaped, but he had no force to withstand the onset. He would indeed have been overwhelmed, had not Sauron's host been attacked in the rear, for Durin sent out a force of dwarves from Khazad-dûm, and with them came the elves of Lothlorien, led by Amroth. Elrond was able to extract himself, but was forced away northwards, and it was at that time he established a refuge and stronghold at Imladris. Sauron withdrew the pursuit of Elrond, and turned upon the dwarves and elves of Lothlorien, whom he drove back. But the gates of Moria were shut, and he could not enter. Ever afterwards, Moria had Sauron's hate, and all orcs were commanded to harry dwarves whenever they might. Year 1699, Sauron overruns Eriador. But now Sauron attempted to gain the mastery of Eriador. Lothlorien could wait. Sauron's immediate purpose was to take Lindon, where he believed that he had most chance of seizing one, or more, of the 3 rings, and he called in his scattered forces, and marched west towards the land of Gil Galad, ravaging as he went. But his force was weakened by the necessity of leaving a strong detachment to contain Elrond, and prevent him coming down upon his rear. As a result, not only did the great city of Khazad-dûm become a dwelling for the orcs of Sauron, but the eager delving of the dwarves had aroused a Balrog. Year 1700, Tar-Ministir sends a great navy from Numenor to Lindon. Sauron is defeated. Sauron had mastered all Eriador, save only besieged Imladris, and had reached the line of the river Lun. He had summoned more forces, which were approaching from the southeast, and were indeed in Einedwaith, at the crossing of Tharbad, which was only lightly held. Gil Galad and the Numenorians were holding the Lun in desperate defence of the Grey Havens, when in the very nick of time the great armament of Tar Minas came in, and Sauron's host was heavily defeated and driven back. The Numenorian admiral JRR Tolkien, the shipmaster, sent part of his ships to make a landing further south. Sauron was driven away southeast, after great slaughter at the Sandford, and though strengthened by his force at Tharbad, he suddenly found a host of the Numenorians again in his rear. For JRR had put a strong force ashore at the mouth of the Gwaithlo, that is, the Grey Flood, where there was a small Numenorian harbour. This was Vinyalonde. In the Battle of Gwaithlo, Sauron was routed utterly, and he himself only narrowly escaped. Year 1701. Sauron is driven out of Eriador. The Westlands have peace for a long while. Sauron's small remaining force was assailed in the east of Rohan, and he, with no more than a bodyguard, fled to the region, afterward called Dagor Lad, the battle plain, whence broken and humiliated he returned to Mordor and vowed vengeance upon Numenor. The army that was besieging Imladris was caught between Elrond and Gil Galad and utterly destroyed. Eriador was cleared of the enemy, but lay largely in ruins. Though Galadriel deemed it her duty to remain in Middle-earth while Sauron was still unconquered, she determined to leave Lothlorien and to dwell near the sea. She committed Lothlorien to Amroth, and passing through Moria, with Celebrimbor, she came to Imladris, seeking Celeborn. There she found him, and there they dwelt together for a long time, and it was then that Elrond first saw Celebrimbor, and loved her, though he said nothing of it. It was while Galadriel was in Imladris that the first White Council was held, and it was there determined that an Elvish stronghold in the east of Eriador should be maintained at Imladris, rather than in Eregion. At that time also, Gil Galad gave Vilya, the Blue Ring, to Elrond, and appointed him to be his vice-regent in Eriador, but the Red Ring he kept, until he gave it to Círdain when he set out from Lindon in the days of the last alliance. For many years the Westlands had peace, and time in which to heal their wounds. Year 1731, another date for the ascension of Tar Minas to the throne of Numenor, as the 9th king of that realm. Exurge Tolkien, Secundum Tolkien, Counter the Rings of Power Heresy Aeternum. This concept is copyrighted 2024 by Novus Renaissance, the home of the supernatural fantasy series Vahdor and its lost legends and sagas of pre-flood Earth. Come and join us on an epic adventure and discover our books, music, merch, and the inspiration of your imagination.